Welcome to New Atlas Live. I'm Brian Berletic. Joining me, as always, is Angelo Giuliano. And joining us today, this Friday evening, at least for us here in Asia, is Carl Zha. Thank you, Carl, so much for joining us. We want to talk about Taiwan. We also want to talk about the U.S. building consensus for war with China. And I didn't ask you to talk about this ahead of time, but I just want to ask, what is your take? And because I want to get into this a little bit, these Chinese police stations that we're discovering all around the world. That now, instead of just one Chinese person under our bed, there's two and possibly a Chinese police officer. Carl, can you give us, first of all, welcome, and can you give us your thoughts on that?
Hey, thanks, Brian. So this I just saw this too, and what I saw was a tweet from Michael Tracy on Twitter. So he actually opened up the Department of Justice evidence, the actual many pages of evidence that presented for the Chinese for these devious Chinese engaging in online harassment, and there's an image of a meme. I wish I can show this here. Brian, let me send you the link. Maybe you can
Sure.
figure it out how to show it. I'll put it in the private chat. So I mean,
Sure.
it's a lot easier if people see visually what kind of the FBI evidence is for this case, for these so-called Chinese super police, Chinese national police for harassing people inside U.S. I sent you the link in the private chat, Brian.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah.
And I just want to point out that, let me see, let me get this up over here. I just want to point out that if you read the FBI affidavit, which I did, I read the whole thing today, they keep calling it a police station, but it's interchangeable with service center. It's like a service center, because what it actually was one or two guys who are part of a community association, which is something that's very common in Asian communities around the world, have a community association. And then as part of the association, built onto it was this service center. If you want to renew your driver's license back in China, you don't want that to expire and then have to go through the whole process when you get back home. They will help you do it on WeChat, online, submit the documents, and help follow up. And this is very similar to, say, the visa services you'll find here in Thailand, where I'm based. Angelo, right before we got started, was telling me about Switzerland, how they contacted Angelo in China and asked him to help out with some cases. So this is something that happens very often.
So Angelo is Chinese police now. Wow. Welcome to the force. Welcome to the force, Angelo.
I was actually in Switzerland, and they need a translator. And actually, for you have, randomly you have like a Chinese that do illegal acts, abroad, and you have entities within the consulate that actually take care of this, extradition, and they offer certain services. And actually, there's a very close cooperation when it comes to illegal immigrants. And this is and it's not done like underground. This is something that is done and probably on the request of the country, like for example, Switzerland. So they cooperate with the Chinese consulate when they have Chinese illegal immigrants, and this facilitates. So again, it's interesting when in this article, what they say these days, that they talk about 15 police stations, and they arrested 2 people, and just allegations so far. If there are 15 police stations, you should have like hundreds of Chinese police agents to be arrested, right?
Yeah, Carl, this is the image right here that you were talking about.
Yeah, this is the actual FBI document was presented as evidence of nefarious Chinese activity in the United States. That mean image we're looking at on screen. This is what they claimed they were, these Chinese agents were using to harass good old Americans on American soil. I hope you guys can all see it. I would before I come to the show, I was gonna have the similar setup with a Chinese flag in my background and a Mao poster.
That would have been really funny, Carl.
next time, Brian.
Next time.
Yeah.
So yeah, and so why are we talking about this? Because I read the BBC and I was reading through it. This is what raised my suspicions. They were so ambiguous about absolutely everything, and what they were doing was deliberately doing that so that readers who are paranoid, perhaps even racist against China to begin with, they would fill in all the details themselves. For the worst case scenario, though, there's a global network of Chinese police stations wrapping their tentacles around the planet to control the world, when in reality it's a community association helping people renew their driver's licenses, which is what it says in the FBI affidavit. There's some other accusations cooked up by Safeguard Defenders. It's one of the many U.S. government-funded propaganda organizations out there just spreading lies about China and everywhere else. And we're talking about this because I want to talk about the U.S. building consensus for war with China. We see this every day. And Carl, I follow you on Twitter. And by the way, you had some issues with Twitter. Carl's Twitter account, it's in the video description below. So if you're not following it, follow it. If you were following it and you unfollowed it because his account got hacked, you can refollow it.
I just like to make an announcement using your platform. I'm not in the business of selling laptops online. Yeah. Never was. Okay, so anytime you see me hawking some kind of wares on my Twitter profile, probably means my account has been hacked. As it was for the last 6 days. Yes. Thank you, Brian.
Yeah. So that's all straightened out. But I've been following you. You do commentary on all of the crazy propaganda coming out of the West. It's getting worse and worse. So maybe you want to kind of talk a little bit about that, and then we could start talking about Taiwan itself, because this is the focal point. This is where the U.S. is trying to trigger some sort of conflict with China, proxy or even directly. So what are you seeing? You've been following this for a long time. What do you see regarding this building of consensus for war with China?
So just yesterday, United States Congress, so the U.S. Congress actually have a House Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party. They have a whole Congress group that designed just for the Chinese Communist Party. So yesterday they decided to conduct a war game with the help of a neocons think tank, a project for new American security. And they did a war game over a war with China over Taiwan. So this is how serious it is. Like, U.S. elected officials are publicly wargaming a war with China. And this is, this is serious, folks. I mean, and what has been. And this is not the first time. This is not the first time the war game has been done, because the Center for New American Security, they actually did a war game a couple months back without the congressman, and now they're up the ante, and unfortunately they're not televising the actual war game process, because I'm very much curious to find out what happened, who sank whose battleship, but what this is designed to do is just creating an atmosphere. They're shifting the overtones window. Now they're normalizing the talk about war with China. They're letting that seeping into the public consciousness. And it got to the point where just a week ago, the chairman of the Joint Chief of Staffs, General Milley, actually gave a interview on to Defense One. He actually had to come out and say, whoa, guys, cool off with the war with China talks. This is not helpful. I mean, when you have the head of Pentagon that have to come out and publicly say, let's cool off the war talk, it's pretty bad. I mean, it is that bad in United States when you have freaking Pentagon have to say, okay, like maybe we're going a little bit too far here. But I mean, I think, well, Brian, you know how crazy it is. I actually didn't realize how crazy United States is until I moved away, and now I have lived abroad for 3 years and looking to US from the outside in. I'm like, this is
Yes.
a crazy place. How did I live there for 30 years? But back then, when you are inside that environment, you're not aware of it. You're like the frog that been boiled alive slowly. But yeah, it's quite ridiculous, and I think a lot of it also have to do with grift, because to be honest with you, Brian, I don't think any of the U.S. congressmen really care about Chinese Communist Party or even Chinese people or anything China. What they're doing is doing for their own careers, for continual campaign donations from the important financial donors, especially from the defense industry, and the result right now, the hatching up the tension over Taiwan, which people don't remember. Back in 2014, China and Taiwan, mainland China and Taiwan actually have a very amicable relationship. The Taiwan lifted all the restrictions on the mainland tourists to visit. 2 million Taiwanese people were living, studying on mainland. That's out of a population of 25 million on Taiwan. So that's almost 10% of Taiwan's population has moved to mainland to work and study. But what happened since then is this U.S. have been pushing, starting from Hillary Clinton's so-called pivot to Asia. U.S. have been steadily militarizing the Western Pacific, but they position it as saying China has been aggressive. We have to contain China. But a lot of time, China is just responding to all this provocation from the United States because, for U.S. politicians, it's all a game. We know how they are. They're just a bunch of loudmouth, right? They're trying to get votes and get more money. But their rhetoric do have consequences. That's why Pentagon have to step in and say, hey, guys, calm down. Because the Chinese leadership, they do take what the Western leaders say seriously, especially what they say in public. And so what you have is, right after the Nancy Pelosi's visit, China conducted the military exercise around the Taiwan island, which hasn't happened since 1998, right? And again, when the Speaker of the House, McCarthy, decided to meet with the leader of Taiwan, Tsai Ing-wen, in U.S., China again conducted the exercise to assert their sovereignty. Of course, in the Western media, that's been used as another example of China is being aggressive. Well, if McCarthy didn't meet with Tsai Ing-wen, all this wouldn't have happened. People would just go on with their lives as before. So U.S. is the one that's actively provoking China to promote arms sales to Taiwan, because Taiwan has like the world's 6th largest dollar reserve as a foreign currency reserve. So the U.S. is pushing. Just recently approved like $619 million worth of arms sales to Taiwan. So it's all a grift designed to recycle Taiwan's large foreign currency reserve into the pockets of the sponsors of our good congressmen back home.
Yes, and on the screen right now is a recent deal, 400 Harpoon missiles. These are anti-ship missiles. The deal isn't going to be concluded until 2029. I mean, it will not be fulfilled until 2029, which a lot can happen between now and then. But this is Boeing. This is all money going into Boeing's pocket. And you were talking about how oh my goodness, look at all these pop-ups, stars and stripes. This is about 200 additional U.S. contractors going to Taiwan to supposedly train the military. This is on top of dozens, maybe scores of U.S. troops that are already there for that purpose. So the U.S. and maybe I'll bring in Angelo because Carl just dropped off. Angelo, maybe you could talk a little bit about the official status of Taiwan within the United Nations and also within the vast majority of Western nations, the U.S. government, the UK, the EU, Australia, the one China policy. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that, and I'm going to try to figure out where Carl went.
So in the 1970s, there was a shift of recognition of the official representative of China. So before the 1970s, Taiwan was actually occupying the seat at the UN. And then you had a shift. You had a vote at the UN, and most of the countries at the UN voted for shifting the recognition to China. Since then, you had a few countries that, maybe dozens of countries that were still recognizing Taiwan, but this amount of countries, went down. And now, who do you find? Which countries are still actually recognizing Taiwan as the representative of China? It's a handful of countries, mainly some islands. You had what was the last one? Was to shift? Was a Central American country?
It was Honduras.
Was it Honduras?
I think it was Honduras. Yes.
Yeah.
So additional to that, it's very clear. It's in the Taiwanese constitution. It says clearly, that there's only one China. So in order, even practically, if Taiwan wanted to become independent, first of all, it's illegal. They need to amend the constitution. To amend the constitution, you would have 75% of the legislative councils, called legislative yuan, to initiate a referendum. So it needs to go through that, and then you would have a majority of people voting for having a direct vote for independence. So it's, practically impossible. So here you just have like some moves by the DPP, the DPP, the pro-independence party of Taiwan. But very often she's actually, there's a fine line between legality of what she's doing and saying, because she, it's illegal to declare independence. The posture she's taking, she's just, she's provoking. And we see lots of parallels between what we saw in Ukraine and what we're seeing with Taiwan. But I want to point out, really, there's a big question. We talk very often about the red lines. And I think the red lines of China, I think that China will be very strong, will send very, very strong messages, and will do everything it can. But it will be extremely patient. Because at the end of the day, just imagine if we have 400, a few hundred US Marines on Taiwan soil. Yeah, well, wait, what if you send thousands of them? What's the difference? Ultimately, time is on the side of China. I think the red line for China is much, it can stretch quite a bit. I would say, maybe, declare independence, of course, but then I would say, like nuclear bombs being in Taiwan, but in order to do that, they will still need to go through the legal procedure. So again, now, what she's doing by bringing in U.S. Marines, bring thousands. It's not going to change. See what the world is doing right now. It's de-dollarizing. That's the real game. Really, if you look at the real game, once you control the money, you control the rest. Time is on the side of China. Just wait. Let them play like clowns. But you need to put some pressure, of course. But ultimately, just wait and be patient. Don't do what your opponent is expecting you to do. And I think there's so much wisdom here. From China, really, you see, China has been preparing for this for the last 70 years. And the moves of China, they're thinking in terms of generation. They have so many moves ahead. In the US, they're thinking in terms of election cycles. They are thinking about how I can get elected for the next round. How I get not get elected. How I get my funding. You get the funding, you get elected, basically. So again, we need to pray for the next 3 to 4 years. But there's a meme when it comes to China, the secret plan of China, uncovered by the CIA. Just wait for the US to collapse. That's the secret plan of China. I mean, because you see what it's doing. See what it did. It shot itself in the foot when it seized the billions of dollars of Russian assets. It's a de facto bankruptcy of a system. What is happening? You see the shift? The shift is happening. It's happening.
Yeah, it's just going to get worse as they, because you already see them trying to move on to China through Taiwan. Now, Carl, you're into the history as well as the current events, and people see China now, and the Western media depicts them as aggressive, just as you said. But in reality, didn't the U.S. actually militarily occupy Taiwan for years, and then only when they agreed to the one China policy, they officially left. But unofficially, they have been backing separatism there ever since. Can you talk a little bit about that and how it has led to this point where we're at now and how that guides Chinese policy today?
Yeah, so what most people don't realize is United States have been intervening in a Chinese civil war since 1949. 1949 is when the Chiang Kai-shek government on mainland China has been defeated by the communists, and they fled to the island of Taiwan. And in 1950, Mao was about to order the PLA to cross the Taiwan Strait to finally unify Taiwan with mainland. Then in June 1950, the Korean War broke out. And then Truman authorized the 7th Fleet to sail into the Taiwan Strait to physically blocking the People's Liberation Army from crossing the Taiwan Strait. And back then, because mainland China didn't have a navy, they didn't have an air force, there's not much they could do. Now, keep in mind, in June 1950, this is before the Chinese involvement in the Korean War itself. So eventually, all the Chinese troops was on the other side of the Taiwan Strait that was ready to go to Taiwan. They were shipped north by the winter, by October, and when United States and so-called UN forces have crossed the 38th parallel despite the Chinese warning into North Korea, and that's those troops that would have gone to Taiwan went into Korean War. So this is what got us to the situation today. The separation between Taiwan and mainland China happened because in 1950, Truman sent in the 7th Fleet. And Angelo was earlier talking about stationing U.S. Marines and nuclear weapons on Taiwan. That happened. That all happened before. So back in 1950s, U.S. stationed up to 30,000 troops, military personnel on the island of Taiwan, and they stationed ballistic missiles with nuclear warhead aiming at mainland China. And a couple of years ago, before Daniel Ellsberg, before he died, he revealed that back in 1958, U.S. had a plan to use nuclear weapons on China if Mao had authorized the PLA to take, not even take Taiwan, but take a little offshore island, a couple kilometers off the Chinese coast, the island of Kinmen. And if the PLA had crossed, back then the Pentagon plan was to strike China with nuclear weapons they had positioned on Taiwan itself. So that all changed with the Nixon visit to China in 1972. After Nixon and the then Premier Zhou Enlai, they signed the Shanghai Communique, in which the Shanghai Communique actually says that United States should recognize that the Chinese on both sides of the Taiwan Strait are part of one China, and Taiwan is part of China. And United States recognize that this is an issue to be resolved among the Chinese on both sides of the Taiwan Strait. And U.S. do not stake a position. This forms the basis of the Sino-American relationship, the normalization of ties that happened afterwards, leading on to the establishment of full diplomatic relationship in 1979. What have happened since? was that the two countries have getting increasingly intertwined economically through people-to-people exchange, but around 2012, around the during the time when Hillary Clinton was the Secretary of State, that's when United States suddenly realized that during the years that it has spent on military adventurism in Afghanistan, in Iraq, China have now grown its own domestic economy to the point now it poses as a near peer competitor to United States, which United States find unacceptable because they don't want any challenge to their hegemony in any part of the world. And that's when they initiated so-called pivot to Asia. So what they have done is they're starting to gradually walk away from their own commitment to the one China policy, which has been the linchpin of the China-U.S. relationship. That's why we've seen Nancy Pelosi flew into Taiwan on the U.S. Air Force asset with the U.S. Air Force fighter escorts, right? And this is just United States know where Chinese red line is. Right? Chinese red line has been very clear. As long as Taiwan do not declare formal independence, status quo can go on as it is currently. The overwhelming majority people on Taiwan has said they want to maintain the status quo, right? But what United States is doing is exactly what they have done in Eastern Europe when they expanded the NATO eastward to a Russian border since the collapse of the Soviet Union. So since Soviet Union, U.S. is stepping closer and closer to the red line. It's like, oh look, I'm almost touching it, And it's a really stupid game because this is highly dangerous. United States and China are both nuclear armed nations. Anytime, just one mistake, we could face a World War III situation. Like currently, there's about at least 3 U.S. carrier groups acting around Chinese coast, right? I mean, and they're in close proximity with the Chinese Navy. Any mistake, unplanned mistake, it could blow up to World War III with unforeseen consequences. This is highly irresponsible. But again, I'm ranting again, so I yield my time to Brian and Angelo.
No, that's okay. That's why we got you on here. I think it's really important for people to understand that China remembers all of this. The American public know none of this because the Western media deliberately omits this out of every single article. They always imply or infer that Taiwan is somehow a country. And I know Americans who are smart and relatively well-informed who honestly think Taiwan is a country. They have no idea that even the Constitution of the administration in Taiwan, which is actually called the Republic of China, considers Taiwan to be part of one single China.
Brian,
yeah.
many Americans can't tell the difference between Thailand and Taiwan.
That's true. I've had people, hey, Brian, how are things in Taiwan? I couldn't tell you. So China remembers the U.S. putting tens of thousands of troops on that island, and they remember them pointing missiles at the rest of China from that island. They remember that. So the fear is real and it is rational. And the Western media pretends that it's irrational. China is aggressive and the U.S. is just stepping in to be peacemaker when they're at the core of the problem in the first place. And I'm glad you brought up the fact that after the Civil War, it was the U.S. intervention that kept the Republic of China alive. From then all the way until now, military and political support from Washington is what has sustained the Republic of China in Taipei. There's a myth that it is autonomous or self-governing. It would not exist without constant U.S. support. So that is really important to keep in mind. And then there was the Kuomintang, and now we have the Democratic Progressive Party. These are the two main parties that are vying for power in the administration of Taiwan. There's going to be an election next year, isn't it? January 2024. I'd like Angelo and then Carl, how is this going to impact this? And is this going to force the U.S. to rush its timeline for trying to provoke some sort of conflict with China over Taiwan? Because before Tsai Ing-wen and the Democratic Progressive Party got into power, as Carl was saying, the ties between Taiwan and the rest of China were actually improving and going quite well. And then the U.S. interrupted, just like they did in Ukraine, the Sunflower Movement. And essentially, they got Tsai Ing-wen and the DPP into power. So, Angelo, you first, and then Carl.
So first of all, we saw the local elections of last year, and this was the facto referendum against Tsai Ing-wen, because people are very upset about her policies, and especially the fact that she's actually stirring up problems between the mainland and Taiwan. They're not interested in what she's doing. You know, if you ask most Taiwanese, they don't like the moves, the provocation that, you know, and the focus. What Taiwanese want is a better, you know, they're more like down to earth. It's about, you know, is my standard of living getting better or not? These tensions with the mainland is not bringing anything, and they know that the end game, and they know that they're being used. Keep in mind, lots of Taiwanese, they know that they were dropped since 1949 to 1972. They were U.S. ally. Overnight, they were dropped completely, discarded like a used condom. Sorry for the metaphor, but that's what happened. So you've been used once. Are you going to do the same mistake? Because what they did, they overnight took China in and say, you are my new ally because I'm going to use you against the USSR. And China played it extremely well. They got funding, transfer of technology. It was amazing, you know, and they pretended, to my opinion, is that China kind of pretended they were on the side of the US against the USSR, but USSR was not really an enemy. You know, they knew that USSR was part of the, you know, the global south, you know, something like countering US hegemony. So here you have national elections, and if it follows a trend, they could be like more balanced, you know, maybe possibly the Kuomintang winning, and this could change the whole dynamic. But I would be very careful, because if you look at the difference between local election and national elections, lately the trend was that DPP would do quite well on national elections. But, you know, it's really important to see how did Tsai Ing-wen got elected 2 times, 2016, 2020. She got elected because there was a big push. There was this sunflower revolution in 2014, 2015, and they actually leveraged on the Occupy Central in Hong Kong. So overnight there was a shift, you know, and she won. Then she was into power for 4 years. People hated her. They hated her. But then 2019, attempt of color revolution in Hong Kong. She went from 35% of support to 60%. Who was backing the riots in Hong Kong? You had the DPP. You had a party plus US NGOs and the State Department. So you see, those were fabricated wins, you know. It's so I don't know. I mean, that's a big question mark. But I wouldn't be. I have a big question here. You know, when we see what happened with Zelensky, in reality, what they did was, additional to taking power, not only lied to get into power, but then he did a soft coup. We are into a coup. Nobody talks about it, but what he did, once you have martial law, you can do whatever you want. My fear is that we might have, at some point, if there are more tensions, we might be, you know, the DPP and Tsai Ing-wen, she might be in a position to be able to use laws to make a soft coup and have more power, because, you know, martial law, it's a possibility. You know, actually martial law was, you had martial law in Taiwan since 1985. You know, it's nothing new. That's my fear. That maybe overnight you could have probably more likely the DPP doing a soft coup. But there's also, you know, possibly the Kuomintang. You never know. The army, you know, there's probably some, you know, people more rational in the army that could do a coup. Yeah.
I think I agree with Angelo that we have to be cautious, because you're exactly right. Tsai Ing-wen was on her way to losing her last election, presidential election. Her approval rating was actually single digits heading into that election. And then Hong Kong riot happened, and there was a wave of fear mongering in the Taiwan media. And Tsai Ing-wen was basically, look, we could end up like Hong Kong. If you don't elect me, it's gonna be like like the Hong Kong police on the street oppressing all your freedoms, right? So all that fear mongering worked. I mean, she went from single digit approval rating went to win the island wide election. So I'm gonna have to be I'm cautiously optimistic about the coming election, but I have to see what kind of shenanigans they might be pull out, and that's another reason why I think the Hong Kong riot, which was orchestrated with the help and funding of NED, National Endowment for Democracy, that was only partially to destabilize Hong Kong, but even U.S. knew they couldn't do. China is not going to lose control in Hong Kong. So why did they do it? I mean, they basically expose all those years of networks they have built in Hong Kong during the Cold War, and you throw all their political capital and resource into this. I think the bigger prize was Taiwan. They did the Hong Kong riot to create that fear, that atmosphere of fear that sways the Hong Kong Taiwan election. Now, they're going to have to do something of that scale if they want to sway the next Taiwan election, but I will never put it beyond them. And everyone knows at this point, if the KMT becomes okay, my son wants this. Okay, maybe I'll hand the mic over.
Okay, let us know, because I want you to continue, but you take care of your business. Trust me, that is important business.
I can follow up on what Carl Zha said just before. Actually, you said it absolutely right. The end game, it was never about Hong Kong. They couldn't do anything. It was all about Taiwan. Why? Because in Hong Kong, what they did was a one country two system. One country two system is basically, there's sovereignty, one country, there's sovereignty of China over Hong Kong, but you get to keep your own system. We don't interfere. They didn't even have an extradition treaty between Hong Kong and mainland China. So that test of one country two system, they wanted to apply to Taiwan. They needed to show Taiwan, you see, you can come back to the mainland, to the motherland, and you get to keep your own system to the extent that you can even keep your army. For China, what they need, actually nothing would change. They wouldn't even have Beijing politicians going to Taiwan. On the contrary, you would have representative politicians from Taiwan going to Beijing. But nothing would change, nothing. And you see, I was in 1997 in Hong Kong. I was there July 1997 doing the handover. I experienced pre-handover, after handover, and the last 25 years. You know what? Nothing changed. Deng Xiaoping, what he said? He said, 50年不变. 50 years, nothing would change. And nothing had changed. But and this was actually a problem for the US and the collective West. This is why they had to instigate a color revolution. It was not overnight. When they started planting the seeds for the color revolution in Hong Kong, before the handover, they started doing reforms. And the problem in Hong Kong is that they didn't have national security law. So when you don't have national security law, then you can pour millions of dollars everywhere, from the school education system to the media. You can do whatever you want. And I like to say one thing is that the handover in Hong Kong didn't happen in 1997. The handover happened when there was a national security law enacted. That was the real handover. That was when Hong Kong really ultimately came back to China.
That's exactly.
Go ahead, Carl.
No, that's it. I was just going to follow up on what Angelo said. That's exactly right, because for the entirety of Cold War, Hong Kong basically was the the battlefront of the Cold War. It has all the intelligence agency of every country, you name it, all crawling in Hong Kong. You have the British intelligence agency, MI6. You have the CIA there. Of course, you have the Chinese, right? And you also had the Soviets, also, and Taiwan, and then also from Taiwan, the KMT secret agents were there. So I think the result of the Hong Kong riot, it actually was a chance for China to clean house. Like all these networks that was built in for decades now got exposed, and with all their fundings, etc. Jimmy Lai, the Hong Kong media tycoon, he funded the Color Revolution in 2014 and then in 2019, and guess who is his right-hand man? American named Mark Simon. And Mark Simon came from a pedigree CIA family. Of course, you can never say, whether he's CIA or not, but but his father was a CIA officer, and so all these people are now, got removed from the position of influencing Hong Kong for a long time. So this is one win, but of course the setback is Taiwan, and we're gonna have to see how the next election play out. Everyone knows if the KMT wins the election, the tide is gonna improve. So even the U.S. news have to kind of admit that if the KMT wins the presidential election, the tide with the mainland will improve. But that's not what they're counting on, right? I mean, that doesn't fit the whole idea of the U.S. military-industrial complex, which is keeps the tension high and keeps the money flowing to Raytheon Martin, to Boeing, to Lockheed, to Raytheon, to Lockheed Martin, right? And then all the kickbacks go to all the think tanks and all the congressmen. It's a big grift. Because right now, what does the United States have left on its soil? I remember reading the investment newsletter of investor Mark Faber. He went to U.S. several years ago, and he said, I'm trying to figure out what does U.S. produce anymore. So I realized it's three things: beer, hooker, and weapons, right? I mean, this is what U.S. is doing right now: military Keynesianism, right? They don't have anything else, because the United States government refused to invest in public education, refused to invest in public infrastructure. Everything that China has done right, that U.S. refused to do. It's not like U.S. lacks the capability. They just don't want to do it, because the U.S. elite, they just don't care about the rest of us. Us, Brian, me, we're just peasants to them. Why do the lords in their manors care about us, right? So their whole goal is to recycle all the dollars into their coffer, and then buy up all the medias and keep on pushing all the corporate propaganda, and then blame everything in China, right? Like another reason for China-U.S. tension is because U.S. domestic politics, because the U.S. industrialists have been hollowing out the industrial base of U.S. since 1970s. They have been shifting production to East Asia, and it's easy again to blame China for that, because hey, China steal our jobs. But look, China didn't hold a gun to Steve Jobs' head, say, you got to move Apple factories to China. No, Steve Jobs did that voluntarily. Why? Because it's cheaper to do it in China. And because China already had a world-class infrastructure, they have a highly educated workforce, and it's just cheaper. But you cannot say, oh, it's a U.S. capitalist that did all this. But it's a lot easier, because these are the guys who own all the newspapers in U.S. Jeff Bezos owns Washington Post, so you can't blame Jeff Bezos. You can't blame Walmart, and so it's much easier. Political expedient say it's China's fault. That's why all the U.S. politicians right now are all on the anti-China bandwagon, because everyone knows there's some serious problem in U.S. Right? The U.S. middle class is going through serious crisis. But rather than trying to fix the issue, because who wants to do real work of actually fixing United States? It's a lot easier just to make some get on your soapbox, do some grandstanding, and say China did it. China is our enemy, and that's why you have stupid Ted Cruz saying China is has a 1,000-year plan to destroy America. It's like, dude, you'll be lucky if United States still exists 1,000 years from now, unless what he meant was China had a long-term plan since Tang Dynasty, to destroy United States. And Ted Cruz is a moderate one, because just before Ted Cruz, you have the South Dakota governor on TV said China had 2,000-year plan to destroy America. I mean, these politicians are just crazier and crazier. I sometimes I don't know how they get elected, but that's a way in United States. You just got to be a big loud mouth, and you don't even have you can say the stupid shit as long as you can say it with confidence. You'll get some people to vote for you. You'll get some big sponsors to give you money. We're all in the wrong business, Brian. We should be in politics.
I think we could come up with much more convincing narratives. Also, I think there's also there's a tangible panic in the United States because they can see that China is going to surpass the US, and there really is nothing they can do about it. Just as you say, the only thing that they still are investing in is military power. But I want to talk a little more about one country, two systems in Hong Kong and how it applies to Taiwan. And I want to ask both of you if you feel like this is a viable proposition for Taiwan. So we were talking about one country, two systems in Hong Kong. We see people complaining that, China betrayed that. It's not, they uprooted all of that. But in reality, all they did, we were just talking about the US FBI arresting people for helping them renew their driver's licenses. And this was the US sending money into media, education, political parties. And these were people going out onto the streets and burning things down using US money and other types of support. So it was a real problem, and China uprooted that problem. That was not the same as eradicating one country, two systems. But it was, in as you both pointed out, that was what was cited in Taiwan as, look, this is how bad it'll be here in Taiwan. And in reality, there are a lot of people in Taiwan that are getting money from the US government who will be uprooted once sovereignty is restored and reunification happens. So can both of you kind of elaborate a little bit more on how one country, two systems applies to Taiwan, and how the people on the island of Taiwan, how they perceive this? Maybe start with Carl. Yes, start with Carl.
Okay, so I look at it, why, what's the biggest gripe, people in Taiwan have possibly against reunification. So I turn into all these different talking heads on Taiwan, right? And the biggest complaint I hear is, oh no, then if China takes over, then we don't have access to Facebook, YouTube. I mean, seriously, that's the biggest concern right now. Is they won't be able to access all these Western social media. I think there's something China can work with here. I mean, if that's a worst complaint you're gonna have to live under Chinese sovereignty. I mean, because right now in Hong Kong, Angelo would know. It's actually functioning on a different system. When I go to Hong Kong, I don't need VPN.
No, it's exactly the same as you would have in any Western countries. Again, there are national security laws now, so they and that there's an extension when you have when you talk about sovereignty, it's not only the land, it's the information space. So they make sure that you don't have they cannot influence through the social media, and like the manufacturing consent and manipulate people, and whenever it touches national security law, there's the red line. But that's the red line that you have absolutely everywhere, in the US.
But you can still access all the website in Hong Kong.
Absolutely.
Elsewhere, right? Yeah.
Actually, I don't have access to TikTok actually in Hong Kong. It's funny. It's fun. I don't use TikTok, but I don't have access to TikTok. I don't know what's the reason. I think Douyin, you have access to Douyin, but not TikTok. I don't know the reason. But otherwise, nothing.
Douyin is much better anyway. Douyin is have way much better content and way
Yeah.
much more wholesome than TikTok.
That's what I've
So,
heard.
so the only things that you can criticize the CPC. I mean, absolutely no problem. The red line is when it touches national security law. That's only the red line. But like anywhere, if you are calling for regime change, well, in the US the same. That's it's illegal to do that. So I just want to point out. If we go back to what happened in 2019, like any colored revolution, they start with the legitimate grievances of people, frustration, and those grievances are hijacked by Western elements, and they turn this into colored revolution. So that's what they did in Maidan and so on. So very often it's not legitimate, and Hong Kong has its own problems. But you know what? Those problems, they come from colonial era, because Hong Kong is extremely, I mean, it cannot get more capitalistic than Hong Kong. It's like they say you die in order for me to live, you have to die. 你是我活, in Chinese. That's what happened in Hong Kong. But the problem is that China, it's because China never intervened in terms of politics in Hong Kong that you had this problem. And this problem was because of the old oligarch that actually controlled Hong Kong, and they were playing both sides. I won't name, but you know who I am talking about, some very rich people that actually do what they call land hoarding. They get hold of the land, and they keep the prices high while people are living in cages. So you have legitimate complaints, and I agree. Lots of people that came into the street, they came for, general complaints. And then it turned to anti-China and extremely violent and very small minorities. But guess what? At some point, it was so violent, people were so upset that you had 2 million people in Hong Kong. There's a small population. I think it's 7 million people. But you had 2 million people that signed a petition for national security law. Because Hong Kongese, and I think the same as Taiwanese, in reality, they're not very politicized. Chinese, the mentality of Chinese, you know what? I've lived in Taiwan too, so I know how it is, they're very pragmatic. You can come up with the things, freedom, democracy, and like, you know what? Okay, it's cool, it's cool concept, it's Braveheart, it touches me, it's like Hollywood, but ultimately, they're down to earth. I want to buy a house, I want to make money, different culture, but it's down to earth, it's just a blah blah blah.
I have a recommendation for people who may not be, who may not have the privilege of traveling to Taiwan like Angelo. Go check out on YouTube Asian Boss. They conduct a series of street interviews in places like mainland China, Taiwan, and they go ask the Taiwanese youth about how they think about the cross-strait relationship. I remember one interview was like they're approaching these young Taiwanese people, and the girls like, oh yeah, sure, I'm pro Taiwan independence, sure, yeah, why not? And then the interviewers are like, so what happens if the PLA comes tomorrow? And then she says, oh, then I will be singing the Chinese national anthem. I mean, like you are exactly right, Angelo. The Taiwan people, they're just like Chinese people everywhere else. They're very practical, very down to earth, and so it's not like this. People sometimes make comparison Taiwan with Ukraine, but Taiwan do not have a hardcore neo-Nazi movement like the way Ukraine was, because the major difference is that Ukraine was a very poor country after the dissolution of Soviet Union. In fact, Ukraine was doing most poorly among all the former Soviet republic. It was like worse than Russia, worse than Belarus, even worse than some of the Central Asian republics. So there was a breeding ground for extremism. Whereas Taiwan, it's it's a middle developed country. People are comfortable, like the youth rather than stay home and play games and then go out the street and participate in some like neo-Nazi shit. Like when the first war game that done by Center for New American Security a few months ago. So their conclusion was Taiwan would not be able to hold out without U.S. Help for more than 3 months. So I saw one of the street interview that went to interview people in Taiwan about that results. They're like, "What do you think about it?" And it's universal shock. People are shocked. It's like, what? We can hold out for 3 months without American help? That's crazy. I don't believe it. It's like, but that's the reality. And I also remember, but the thing is, Taiwan is not its own sovereign state, despite whatever Tsai Ing-wen says, because nothing would happen in Taiwan without explicit go-ahead from Washington. Tsai Ing-wen would not be able to declare formal independence if she did not have a go ahead from Pentagon signing off from the White House. And I remember there's a famous Taiwanese oppositional politician called Li Ao, and he said, American treat the Taiwan worse than dog. Why? He said, look, if you have a guard dog, you will feed the dog food. You will provide the dog food to the dog. But right now, Americans expect us to pay for their weapons. It's like, what the hell? It's like, if you have a dog, you feed the dog. But right now, you're asking the dog to pay for its food. This is like, and that's another thing about these so-called arms sales to Taiwan. United States never sell its top-of-the-line military hardware to Taiwan because there's always a fear in the Pentagon planner's head that, okay, those weapons eventually going to fall into the mainland Chinese hand. So they never sell the top-of-the-line goods, not even the piece of shit F-35s. They will only give them the outdated, expensive weapon platform that will be useless in a war. And even many people on Taiwan knows it too. So if you ask people on Taiwan and they say, yeah, it's protection money, we're paying so US can help us. So their expectation, US have a different expectation for Taiwan because just like in Ukraine, US expect to fight Russian to the last Ukrainians. US would like to fight China to the last Taiwanese. But that's not what the Taiwanese have in mind. Like I said, Taiwanese are very practical people. They say, why should we fight? It's your job. It's your problem with China. Well, why should we believe for you? You should believe for us, man. But that's why you see editorial after editorial right now in U.S. media. It's like, Taiwan not doing enough for its defense. Taiwan is not getting serious. It's like, of course not. They cut their freaking draft from the military service from 2 years to 1 year and then to 4 months. What can you learn in 4 months? Nothing. And okay, right now, after U.S. pressure, Tsai Ing-wen administration just recently made the military service back to 1 year. Like you have to serve 1 year time. And I actually have a friend, Xiang Yu, doing his service right now in Taiwan. I mean, he's telling me it's like worse than prison because he's like the amount of money you're getting paid is like equivalent of the wage you receive when you're in prison. and basically, a lot of times they make you do a bunch of useless shit. And again, this is it's all for show. All these and for U.S. politicians, their interest is still pushing weapons sales to Taiwan. That's still a number one thing. If you look at the Taiwan Relation Act, right, which U.S. Congress has passed in 1979 after China-U.S. formally established diplomatic relationship, and your Taiwan Relation Act is often cited by U.S. media as a reason, like, oh, we're obligated by Taiwan Relation Act to come to defense of Taiwan. So everybody can Google Taiwan Relation Act. You can find it on the U.S. government site. It does not obligate United States to do shit. Okay, so I can read the Taiwan Relation Act and what it says right now. It says it declares to be the policy of United States to preserve and provide extensive, close, and friendly commercial, culture, and other relations between people of the United States and people of Taiwan, as well as people on China mainland and all other people of the Western Pacific. So this is just a useless declaration. It's like, oh, we love babies, right? I mean, like, of course everybody love babies. And then it says, declare that peace and stability in the area are in the political, security, economic interests of the United States, are matter of international concern. States that United States' decision to establish diplomatic relationship with People's Republic of China rests upon the expectation that future of Taiwan will be determined by peaceful means, that any effort to determine the future of Taiwan by other than peaceful means, including by boycotts or embargo, is considered a threat to peace and security of Western Pacific area and of grave concern of the United States. So Taiwan Relationship Act says United States will be very concerned if Taiwan issue was resolved by non-peaceful means. And then it said, United States shall provide Taiwan with arms of defense character and shall maintain the capacity of the United States to resist to any resort to force or other form of coercion that would jeopardize security, social, economic system of people of Taiwan. So nowhere does it say U.S. will come to defense of Taiwan. And that's called strategic ambiguity. For a long time, that U.S. was leaving room for itself to maneuver. It's not committing itself to do anything, which is a smart thing to do. You don't back yourself into a corner. But recently Biden, I don't know how much mental faculty he still retains. When he was asked by a reporter, would United States come to defense of Taiwan? He said yes. And then the White House come like, whoa, okay, he doesn't know what he's talking about. But I mean, like, it could just be Biden is a senile old man, but it could also be that U.S. This is actually U.S. is pushing the boundaries, right? This is kind of they're playing a game to kind of trying to overstep the red line and then step back. So like, oh, sorry, I'm just kidding. And right now. So the most important line of the Taiwan Relation Act is actually United States shall provide Taiwan with arms of defense character. So that's all it's about, folks. It's about weapon sales. Again, it's about making the military industrial complex people rich. And there's a lot of hubris in the United States. They think doing all this provocation, all these stepping on Chinese red line will not provoke a war. And I think that was their thinking, before when it comes to NATO expansion in Ukraine as well. They thought, oh, we can just keep on pushing. Look, we have been expanding NATO steadily eastward. Russia didn't do shit. We expanded NATO. Well, woohoo, right? But like finally, that reached a breaking point. I think this is why it's a very dangerous game they're playing with China. The Chinese people are very patient. But even the most peaceful, patient people can only be pushed so far. So I'm very concerned because 5 years ago I would not think there will be any possibility of an actual hot war between U.S. and China, and now I'm not so sure. So we are there, guys. This is how close, how far the relationship between U.S. and China has fallen, that we are now talking about a possible World War III. But it is what it is. Unfortunately, we have to deal with the idiots in the U.S. Congress, and hopefully, we don't get into a nuclear exchange.
Yeah, and I just want to point out, because you're talking about how the U.S. is not actually really committed to Taiwan's defense. And if you look at those war games, the papers that they published following the war games, CSIS put one out also, what they admit is that, oh yeah, we could stop China, a military operation that lands on the island of Taiwan, we could stop it. There won't be any infrastructure or industry left. The economy of Taiwan will be gone, but it'll have its political autonomy, but nothing else. That's the only thing it's going to retain. So in essence, they're saying, everything on the island will be destroyed. And the point of the war is not actually to defend Taiwan at all. It's an opportunity, if the US feels they can use it, to knock China down a peg, to do things like, say, implement a global blockade on Chinese maritime shipping to try to destroy the Chinese economy in a very similar way that the US and its allies tried to destroy the Russian economy, which didn't turn out too well, but yet they're still seemingly fully committed to doing it with China next. So maybe start with Angela and then Carl. What do you think about that? And I mean, it's obvious they're making tons of money selling weapons, but there's no qualms that they have about actually killing people either. And I think there is this desperation to prevent China from surpassing the US, even no matter how implausible it is. This is something they're obsessed with. And how far do you think they'll go to prevent this from happening? Angelo?
I think when it comes to the U.S. in the region and the power of projection it has, you need army bases that are close to China. So, what are the partners that they have in the region? You have South Korea and you have Japan. Are those countries willing to fight on behalf of the U.S.? We saw what is happening in Europe, and you have the Baltic states, you have Poland. I mean, those people are extremely irrational, extremely anti-Russian, and they're willing to fight blindly. They want to destroy completely Russia. They want to Balkanize it. I don't see the same hate between South Korea, Japan. On the contrary, they're doing business. I mean, this is very tangible. I doubt South Koreans would go for it. What worries me the most is actually the Japanese. The Japanese, what they did recently was to do a reinterpretation of the Pacific Constitution. So that was the first step. So since World War II, the Constitution of Japan was written by the US. So I mean, de facto, they control Japan, and they have army troops on the ground. But they reinterpreted the Constitution that says clearly that it's a Pacific Constitution. So that was the first step. The second step was to name the reinterpretation was saying that we could come to the help of an ally. That was the reinterpretation. The second step they took was to say clearly that Taiwan was an ally. So clearly they set the ground. And additional to that, now this is real stuff. They are doubling the military expenditure. So my worry is that because again, the containment of China, if the US want to have any chance to, to hit China badly, they would need an ally very close, and probably, Japan. Is Japan on board or not? That's a big question. Again, Japan is not a sovereign state; it's a vassal state. Same as Germany. And then you have the unconditional, AUKUS, Australia, UK, US. Those ones would be in the region. But again, this is which are the partners that are willing to do that, and timing. Really, because every day that passes by is in favor of China. China is gathering support. The global south is seeing what is happening. You see all those shifts. What I'm counting on is what I pay really attention is those shifting countries that are going to make a difference. Which one are there? And we saw that. We saw Saudi Arabia shifting. We saw India shifting. We saw Turkey shifting. Maybe who's next? I think if the day that you have a country, let's say, I don't have any hope. There's a clown Macron, in France. I don't have any hope. But we never know. If a single, could be Italy, I don't know, a small shift, then you have a ripple effect. We need to reach the tipping point where at some point something happened. And then we need a miracle. I still hope, to get the US back to its senses. Is there, this Kennedy? I don't know. Kennedy? Is there a miracle possible? Because you need an adult to come in the US, get the power and say, you know what? Maybe we need a soft landing, and you need to sit down. You might need to sit down with your creditors, with China and so on. Can you bail out the US? There's going to be a transition. And if the crash is very hard. It's going to hurt everybody, including China. And China doesn't want that. China needs to bail out the US. The system is not working. BRICS, that's the beginning. De-dollarization, it's part of it, but it shouldn't be a complete de-dollarization. China do not want the collapse of the US. Now you need a leader in the US that accept that we shouldn't go to war, and we need to sit down with what we call with our enemies, and maybe we can find a solution together that benefits us, because you know where it's heading, the US is heading. If there's de-dollarization, it's going to be a huge collapse, and nobody wants that. So, we need adults around the table, and not emotional. Stop about freedom, democracy, human rights, and so on. No, stop about that. This is not Hollywood. You see the difference now? You have like rational people, and it's not like embracing, oh, I love you, and so on. No, it's about engineers, scientific, and working for their own people, not for the next election cycle.
Angelo, you bring up a point. I never really thought about it this way, but I think you're right. I mean, I think China is more invested in America's self-preservation than the current U.S. leadership, and because they really are. I mean, they're just driving it right off a cliff. Carl, how far do you think this will go? And also, Ma Ying-jeou, the previous president of the administration in Taiwan, went to the mainland. This hasn't happened for however long. Maybe you could explain a little bit about that, what the significance is of that. He's from the Kuomintang, so does that kind of give us a little insight into where things might go on Taiwan, perhaps after the election? And again, what is the likelihood that if the U.S. senses that things are going to shift away from their favor because of the elections, are they going to be tempted to do something very foolish much sooner than I think a lot of people expect?
Well, the Ma Ying-jeou trip, he specifically billed it as a trip for peace. He went to the grave of his grandfather, pay respect, a very traditional Chinese thing to do, to pay respect to your ancestor, to your family, to reaffirm the ties that binds between Taiwan and China. There's actual real family ties, tie of blood that binds the two people together. And also, he must have done it with also an eye for the coming election, because even though he was the ex-leader of the KMT, by him making that peace overture, he's building the political capital for his party, for the KMT, in the next two election, to position themselves as a party that can bring peace with the mainland, which is important. What I'm afraid of is U.S. will try to sabotage that election the way they did it to bring Tsai Ing-wen to power again in the last election cycle. Because the last election, KMT was also poised to win until the Hong Kong riot happened. I don't know, how they're gonna pull off this time, but I expect U.S. is, they still have tricks up their sleeves. So they might. If they sense that election might go the way they don't want, they might do something like that again, and that would be bad, because right now it's really Tsai Ing-wen is really the administration for the last two terms that really have turned up the tension. I mean, any other government will be better at this point, but it's just so happened that the DPP fits the U.S. agenda much better, because U.S. currently do not want tension to dial down. But Angelo raised a very good point. Is right now U.S. is alone trying in its crusade, trying to isolate China. Everybody else just want to do business, right? Like, because China is not forcing people to decide, either you are either with us or against us. China, that's not the way China works. China's like, as long as we can sit down and do business, let's do that. It's U.S. that's coming in and say, oh, you have to choose either us or China. And most people just like to have to live, to keep on going life as they do right now. They can keep friendship with both U.S. and China, so they can get benefits with both sides, which is the most rational approach. But U.S. is the European leadership, they're much beholden to US, unfortunately, because any European leader try to pilot an independent course, they get smacked down really quickly. I mean, look Macron. Macron is like, he's like the neoliberal establishment boy, but even him recognized, look, Taiwan is not European strategic interest. Taiwan is so far from France, and that. And he was, what he said in China was very sensible statement. Europe should not be vassal to United States, and Europe should not get involved in a conflict over Taiwan. And look at the uproar in the media. It's like, what the hell? I mean, I thought what he said was common sense. And people are upset because you think Europe should be vassal to the United States? I mean, like, wow, I didn't know you can say that publicly nowadays, but this is what people are upset about, because he said something that's commonsensical to a lot of people. It's Europe should chart its own independent course, but whether he could pull it through, I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. Like Confucius says, listen to the words but watch for the action. So I'm gonna watch what Macron actually does, and if you look at what the German foreign minister Baerbock, her little performance in Beijing, it's like, why did she even go to Beijing? I mean, she was not there to talk to the Chinese people. She was there using Beijing as a political theater, like for her own domestic audience, for her master in Washington. Like, hey, like, I'm doing your bidding. I'm the loyal German poodle for Washington, and I mean, it's crazy because Germany, they have sacrificed their own self-interest for Washington. They one of their two biggest advantages for German industry is cheap Russian gas and huge Chinese market. Well, United States blew up Nord Stream, so kiss goodbye to the Russian gas, and now US want them to close off the Chinese market. And they're going along with it. I mean, that's just right now. All the German industries are relocating to United States because the natural gas is cheaper there. And all these German politicians, they just bend over. I mean, this is unbelievable to me. But same thing is happening in like Anglosphere in Australia. Australia, their biggest customer is China. China is their biggest, best customer. Yet they're signing on with the stupid AUKUS. They're gonna get a nuclear submarine in like 2030. By then it's freaking, I don't know. Even if they get it, like what's Australia gonna do? They're gonna send the nuclear submarine to sink the tankers that's taking iron ore from Australia to China. I mean, it's completely does not make sense, but it does make sense for United States. So what it's actually designed to do, AUKUS is not designed for security of Australia. What it's designed to do is, under the pretense of giving Australia nuclear submarines, is now Australia have to build a port in Perth, Western Australia, for nuclear submarines. And meanwhile, United States Navy get to use that submarine. So it's really for like a very sneaky way for US to gain a nuclear submarine base in Australia and have Australian pay for it. And the Australian leader just signed out for that shit. So, but even the Australia case, there's still like the new current government is trying to repair their relationship with China, as they still realize like they don't want to push the relationship too far off the cliff. So I see a little bit pushback, even though it's a kind of like timid pushback against the U.S. push for war. It's right now, it's only United States that's pushing for confrontation with China right now. Nobody else is, and that's why all the mainstream media get very aggressive. If anybody challenge this U.S. crazy course, that's why they're all like bagging on Macron for saying like actual sensible shit on China, and they're so. I don't know, man. U.S. is crazy. I share your hope, Angelo, that United States will come.
I have one thing to add.
Go ahead.
You just said something. The U.S. doing something on the next elections. I don't know if you remember Chen Shui-bian. Chen Shui-bian, he was the former DPP leader. He was shot. I mean, supposedly shot. the
And
day
recovering one day. He was shot in the chest
That's
and
incredible.
miraculously recovered.
Yeah, and you know, there was a huge investigation. There was a big case for years and years. It's not solved yet. You know, I mean, later on, he was indicted for corruption. He went to jail and so on. But you know what? There's a big case, and you know who was part of the investigation? They sent from medical staff from the U.S. to investigate his wounds from the U.S. You know, and the next day was recovered. Nothing was like nothing happened.
He has,
You know what?
he has the
But
best human immune system ever.
amazing. That's I don't know, Iron Man, exactly. Iron Man. He has
Yes,
a
yes.
body and you know what? And then so he recovered rapidly and he had the vote of compassion. You know that vote of compassion? He was supposed to lose and he won. And I don't know, it's like, you know, like people in Taiwan, they, you know, I mean, cheat me once, shame on you. Cheat me twice, shame on me. Because they've been so many times cheated by the DPP. You know, Chen Shui-bian, there's a huge case of corruption. You know, and I think now it's out, you know, for medical reason and so on. But, you know, it's huge. They made a huge case of corruption. People have been so disappointed so many times. And every time they won was fake shooting and foreign interference.
You know what's funny is that we're always told about how invasive China is all around the world and how they're interfering and manipulating absolutely everything. But even in Taiwan, it seems like they're powerless to intervene in these elections that the U.S. sets up and rigs time and time again. And basically, the administration in power right now, they answer to Washington. I think it's strange. I mean, doesn't China have any secret police stations in Taiwan?
Well,
what's going on?
I actually saw a news report recently. I forgot which government-funded news channel, Voice America, maybe. They say Taiwan public is susceptible to Chinese language dramas from mainland. You know, because they consume, because they consume the Chinese TV series from mainland, so they're getting brainwashed by osmosis. It's like, Jesus, you know, maybe they're also susceptible because they read Chinese language. I mean, like, but this is kind of, it's just crazy. Like, and people, like you say, Brian, like in US, we're to led to believe Chinese have this like very powerful propaganda machine, right? It's like, come on, you kidding me? It's like nothing compared to the power of propaganda in the United States and the Western media. Because the thing is, Twitter used to label everyone Russia affiliated state media, China affiliated state and media. The thing is, people in China, in Russia, they all know how to read the news. They know, these are government sponsored news channels are supposed to be mouthpiece of the government. But in the United States, a lot of people don't think they're consuming propaganda, right? They're getting corporate propaganda from these corporate media, but they just think, oh, we have a choice between like the Fox News and CNN, right? I mean, like, it's like you have the choice between Biden and Trump. It's like, oh, that's great. There's your freedom of choice right here, folks. And go ahead.
Well, yeah, and also in America, people are now buying into all of these stories about China, whether it's about some sort of genocide being conducted or secret police stations. These are literally the same people that we all know now, in hindsight, lied to us about WMDs in Iraq. And that's all of these stories are about China. They are the WMDs to Iraq. That's what these stories of genocide, human rights abuses, social credit scores, secret police stations, it's just not just a variation of it, but an overload of this, because this is for everything. The US either stops China from surpassing them now, or it will never happen, and China will surpass them irreversibly. They're aware of that. They're throwing everything they've got. And Carl, you're on Twitter, you react to it every single day. These people in the Western media are completely unhinged. Like, you can sense that they are in a panic, and the things that they say day to day are ridiculous. I just wanted to show people this is a relatively minor character in all of this. He's what is he? 2018 National Defense Strategy So I guess he was in the U.S. government in some capacity. This guy actually talks about, just like you were saying, Carl, Taiwan isn't doing enough. So maybe you have to start putting some sanctions or some import controls on Taiwan to force them, because it's not like they don't seem to understand what the threat is. I mean, they're right there off the coast of the rest of China. They don't, but you do in Washington, but they don't understand. What do you think about that, Carl?
Okay. At one point, I'm glad he's out of the government. He's a former Pentagon official, but on the other hand, the current Pentagon official are not any better than him. This is a problem we face in the United States. Where you either get like the crazy group A or the crazy group B. It's a freaking madhouse. And hello, my son is wants some attention. Sorry, I lost my train.
No.
Back to you.
No
back to you.
Yeah, Angela. What do you think? I mean, you're seeing the same thing. You're seeing at the government level, and also, I mean, why was the German Minister of Foreign Affairs in China? Because Blinken can't go. They don't want him there. So they're sending their errand runners to go and dictate and lecture China for them. And that is all Blinken would do if he was in Beijing. I mean, what do you think when you're watching at the government level and also the U.S. media that serves the U.S. government agenda? What do you think as you see them? Do you sense that there's some sort of panic here, Angelo?
Well, I think they're really panicking. But I think they live in a parallel world. They need to see who's respected right now. How many countries are lining up to come to visit China? I mean, really, this is a big. I have the impression. I'd like to make the parallel of 200 years ago when you had so many people, leaders from around the world coming to China and paying tribute. And I have the same impression that they all coming to China because China is extremely respected. China now is bringing results. Just think about the achievements of putting Saudi Arabia and Iran together, solving, probably indirectly China will be solving the Yemen war. We even talking about maybe the Israeli-Palestinian conflict might be solved. China has said that it wants to contribute to that. And I think if China said that, it means there are already preconditions to say it, and they've been doing some work on that. So you see, China is the adult in the room, while the US all along in the Middle East, what did it do? The US did the divide and conquer, taking one side and just comforting one side. And I say, every time, I've got you back, I've got you back. Now the US is retreating from the Middle East. What happened? Countries, they have to solve locally. They have to talk to each other. Because the big boy is not there pushing. I give you weapons. Don't worry. I got your back. And they've seen what happened so many times. The U.S. dropped their ally. They use them. They drop them. Just think how many times. Afghanistan. Just Saddam Hussein. Just think for a second. They used Saddam Hussein to fight Iran. They equipped him and so on. And then they dropped him. You had Al-Qaeda. Osama bin Laden. I mean, Osama bin Laden was in New York Times. It was, it's jihadi, those guys are good. And then he dropped
Warriors of Peace. We had an article. Warriors of Peace, yes.
They know that I'm next. Every time, you have U.S. allies that they know that, what, it's not permanent. The U.S. doesn't have allies, really. If you are in, I mean, the EU, the EU is a good example. It's the EU project. I've said it all along. The EU project was a US initiative. It was never a European initiative. It was a way to control, to make a single market, to control, to destroy nation states. And because they just wanted a single market to control it, it was never, and it was a way to dilute completely democracies, because you see, but you have countries that are actually fighting against that now. France, de Gaulle wanted to join the EU. because France was the most important economy. It was, because Germany had not reunited yet, and he thought that he could actually challenge the EU and he could have power within the EU. But he was the only bright guy that really understood what was behind that. And you see, and we see now, in foreign policy, which, by the way, EU is not supposed to do foreign policy. It's to the competence of nation states. Now you see, you have von der Leyen.
What does she do? I still don't know what does she.
Yeah, what does she do? Elected? Who elected her? Who is she?
But what does she do? I want to be like that guy in the movie Office Space. I want to be like management consulting and just sit here. So exactly what do you do? Because I still don't know what she does. I mean, she has some kind of title, EU, but
she's a people person.
She's a people person. I mean, she went to China uninvited. She just tagged along with Macron's trip. China didn't even invite her, and then China did a great thing. They just totally ignored her, and then they showed Macron a good time. She took Macron's look, we have a house for you in Guangzhou. If you have trouble in US, we can offer you political asylum. Okay, I added that last part, but basically she did say we have a place to stay for you. But they just completely sidelined von der Leyen, because they're probably as confused as I am. What the hell does this woman do? What the hell is she doing over here? I mean, she's just a creature of the Atlantis' wing. I mean, she's basically a mouthpiece for the U.S. interest. And the EU project, I think in the beginning, it may be a attempt for some European leaders like de Gaulle to assert European independence, but you were so infiltrated by the Atlantists. All these creatures like Baerbock, von der Leyen, if you look at their careers, they went through all these Atlanticist institutions that was sponsored ultimately by money coming from Washington. And from a very young age, they have been groomed to be the EU leader. And if you look at them, they're not very impressive, because only this is freaking mediocrities. They're only, their path to climb that career ladder is to be loyal puppy dogs of the United States. That's what the empire cares about, is whether you're loyal or not. They don't care if you actually have any talent, That's why. Sorry, we just lost Angelo.
No, I think he's taking an intermission. I think you're right, Carl. I think that's the problem the West has collectively, is that the leadership is not qualified for the responsibilities that they have. I want to ask one last question, and then we always forget to take the questions from the chat. So maybe we'll do a couple of those. What would reunification look like? Because I know there's a lot of people living on Taiwan. A lot of them have been misinformed by U.S. government-funded media operating on Taiwan as if it was indigenous media. There's a lot of people who might genuinely believe everything that they've been told. But what does reunification look like for Taiwan?
I don't think you would change dramatically from today. I mean, people will still have access to their Facebook, to YouTube. They don't need to VPN. I mean, just like they have access in Hong Kong, right? I mean, like people really think that somehow after unification they're gonna lose access to Facebook. No, that's not gonna happen. I mean, China even offered Taiwan could keep its own army. They just say they have to recognize that Taiwan is part of China. The China is taking, they will not have, they don't need to have their foreign ministry anymore. So they don't have to, they can pay less government officials, for those useless jobs. But other than that, everyday life to life, I don't see much will be changed. Much like Hong Kong after the handover. Angelo, what do you think?
Well, I think it's we need to go back to history, and actually, I think it's the psyche of Chinese. What does it mean? I think Taiwan is the last piece to end this century of humiliation, and this is how we need to see it, because ultimately it doesn't change anything. De facto, Taiwan is integrated; its economy is integrated with the mainland. 50% of its trade is done with the mainland. You have you said it before. There's 2 million of Taiwanese that live in the mainland very happily. So absolutely nothing will change. It's a matter of what we call faith. It's about, it's a national pride. There's so much suffering. If you talk to Chinese, the same as the Russians, like how much they suffered through World War II, and Chinese even more, because this is we talk about 100 years. They've been so much humiliated. They came in eight countries, and they were like, oh, I take this piece, I'm going to sell you opium, I'm going to enslave you through drugs. Just why? Because I have a trade balance in deficit. I'm going to sell you drugs. So in the psyche of Chinese, this is about national pride. But ultimately, do Chinese need the semiconductor of Taiwan? No, it's just a matter of pride, faith. We need to, we've been humiliated for so long. Now we need to end this. And they carry this one generation to another. So it's not about gaining land. It's not about gaining, imperialism. No, it's just about give me back. It was, and time, it doesn't matter. We can leave the status quo. Ultimately, it's going to go back to us.
Yeah, exactly. I agree, and I want to tie that with the question that the user asked: why doesn't U.S. pull the plug on Taiwan semiconductor industry and move it to U.S. already? Why keep it there? Yeah, Angelo is exactly right. China do not want Taiwan for the semiconductors. Mainland China, before the U.S. sanction, they source their semiconductor from Taiwan. They were the 40 to 60% of the Taiwan semiconductor business was to selling to mainland China until United States tell them, oh, you cannot sell to Huawei anymore, right? Because we said so. That just show you Taiwan really doesn't have sovereignty. Taiwan is not a U.S. freaking territory, yet U.S. is passing sanctions that's telling Taiwan company who to do business or not. So United States is trying to move some of the semiconductor manufacturing onshoring Arizona. So they actually forced Taiwan Semiconductor to build the plant in Arizona. But the founder of TSMC, Taiwan Semiconductor, Morris Chan, he was on record of saying he doesn't think that's going to succeed. I mean, the U.S. effort trying to onshore semiconductor, he listed a couple of reasons. One is talent. Right? I mean, like Taiwan, so Taiwan Semiconductor was like the pillar industry that's supporting the whole Taiwan economy right now, by the way. And Taiwan still have, they don't have a talent pool as deep as mainland China, but they still have a lot of talent working as engineers at TSMC. United States, because United States didn't really bother with its public education for decades. It has a talent deficit, and it's making up by attracting talents from the rest of the world. For a long time, I know since 1980s. My dad came to United States in 1985. So I moved to United States in 1990. When I visit my dad in his lab in University of Illinois, it's all Chinese there. Chinese spoken in the research lab. So I know how much research, United States research, had to depend on the back of all these Chinese grad students. And right now, the FBI, some politically ambitious, FBI officer trying to further their career, they're conducting a witch hunt right now on Chinese Americans and Chinese nationals working in U.S. research institution. That's going to absolutely wreck the U.S. research capability. I mean, Silicon Valley, high tech sector, you name it. Chinese people compose a lot. A significant portion of that high-tech workforce in United States, and right now it's not even intentional. It's just because the atmosphere in United States is so poisoned. So any politically ambitious FBI agent will think they can further their career by going to dig out some Chinese mole. And that's going to make the life increasingly difficult for the Chinese scientists in the United States. I'm so glad I'm out of US right now. And these are just one of the reasons that I think US will not necessarily succeed with their onshoring effort of smart, because their Arizona plant is not finished yet. It's not going to finish for several years, and then it's not just a matter of building the physical infrastructure of the plant. You need people, that and the American base in South China Sea viable with new hypersonic missile era. So first of all, what American bases in South China Sea right now? So officially, you in a historical context, the South China Sea used to be American lake during the Vietnam War. U.S. aircraft carrier group used to have so-called Yankee Station just floating around in the Gulf of Tonkin, and U.S. had a naval base in Vietnam, and U.S. had naval and air base in the Philippines. That was all gone by 1990s. Vietnam much earlier in 1970s, and then United States got kicked out of the Philippines in 1990s, and right now United States is trying to creep its way back in. It's doing this so-called like the partnership, whatever. But the Philippines, they're not stupid, man. The Filipinos are also practical people. They're trying to play a balanced game. They understand that they can get like United States weapons and then some technologies, but at the same time they also know their economy depends on China. So even all the so-called U.S. allies in the region, they still want to continue to do business. And they also know the moment they agree to host a U.S. base, guess what happens? You become a target. You are painting a target on your back, because if a war over Taiwan actually breaks out, Chinese missiles going to hit those bases. This is one of the reasons that people in Okinawa do not want to host a U.S. Marine base there. I mean, other than the fact that the U.S. Marines have been commit a bunch of crimes on their soil and being a pain in the ass for decades. They it's true. It's true.
I was there. They are.
Yeah. The local people don't want them there, but you also actually you put their lives in danger by having the U.S. base there. U.S. they in the public statements, like, we are here to promote stability of the Asia Pacific region. No, you're putting people in danger by putting military base there. That's a freaking target, right? And but you don't hear that in the Western media. That's inconvenient truth. So U.S. don't have, like, if you actually look at a map, Taiwan Island is so physically close to the mainland China. China do not need an overseas base to cover Taiwan. China can just take off on its airfield on mainland. They will have the whole Taiwan Strait covered. Right? I mean, that's why a lot of people in U.S., they still think this back in 1950s. U.S. can just send its aircraft carrier battle groups through Taiwan Strait, and then Chinese will back off. It's like, no, if you in a time of war, there's the survivabilities of U.S. service fleet in Taiwan Strait is zero, because that whole area will be covering a missile barrage. And thank you, for Brian, for pulling.
There's at Carl Zha on Twitter. I thought this was really good, though. What people don't seem to understand is there is a threat that China can launch missiles at U.S. bases in the region, but in a way, the U.S. is kind of counting on that, because they know that that's what will allow them to force Japan or South Korea or even the Philippines into a war with them against China. But the reality is that a lot of China's weapon systems are very sophisticated. They bought multiple batteries of S-400 from Russia. Their air defense systems, their multiple launch rocket systems, their missile arsenal can cover all of Taiwan and everything around it without having to use any ships or warplanes, but they also have ships and warplanes. So I think what would happen around Taiwan is the same thing we see in the airspace over Ukraine. If the Ukrainian military or any of their allies try to fly something over Ukraine, it's going to get shot down. They don't really need to hit the air bases, say in Poland. If they were to try to do something like that, they could just shoot it down anytime it's in that airspace. And that kind of manages escalation. And it also is just a reality of modern warfare and where the Chinese military is at this point. And I thought this was a very useful map because you can see all of these concentric rings regarding all of the different missile systems, and literally every single one of them completely passes the island province of Taiwan. So it's all within range. And these are missiles that can hit warships out at sea just as easily as they could hit a base on one of these countries. Yeah.
And I know some people have objections. Oh, whoa, but will they actually hit? But that's where China is actually improving. They have, they don't have to rely on GPS. They have their own satellites. They have Beidou system, and they're getting better with their signal detecting capabilities in the recent years. This is why another reason it's completely bogus, the U.S. claim that China is planning imminent invasion of Taiwan, because again, time is on China's side. Every year it passes, China gains more capability, both economic and military. Because right now, China has 19 shipyards. United States have 7. Okay, and just one of the Chinese shipyard, the Jiangnan shipyard next to Shanghai, is bigger than all of 7 U.S. shipyards. And here's another stats. Last year, China produced 7 warship to every 1 U.S. warship produced. So United States, I think last year produced 3 warships, and China produced 7 times that, so that was like 21 warships. And so United States wants to go to war with a country that makes things. I mean, China makes everything. Like, there's just no match for the Chinese industrial capability right now. But China at the same time is they need time, because they can manufacture, they can build warships like making dumplings, but they need to train personnel. So that's gonna take time. So there's no rush for China to rush to militarily take over Taiwan, in 2025, like the U.S. Pentagon like to think so, or 2027, because by 2030, Chinese Navy is going to even have more warships. They're going to have more missiles. They're going to have more personnel trained, and like the power differential is going to be much more in China's favor. So there's just makes no sense for China to make any kind of military move, which is quite different from Ukraine case once again, because in case of Ukraine, after 2014, the West used the Minsk agreement to freeze the conflict, but at the meantime, they continually funneling weapons and funds to train to Ukraine military forces. That's why the Ukraine military capability is much more today than it was back in 2014. And that's why if Putin have waited several more years, it's going to even get worse. But on China's side, time is completely on China's side. There's no reason to rush. Yeah. Like every more year, China going to gain more warship, more personnel trained up, more satellite capabilities, more early signal detection. And so, so right now, it's not China that's rushing to war.
Good. I'm going to do this last question, and then I'll get closing thoughts, because we're approaching 2 hours now. And I know if I don't stop it now, it'll never stop. So this is the agreed missile sale. I think they're referring to the 400 anti-ship Harpoon missiles, which, again, this isn't going to be fully delivered until 2029. How's that going to impact a physical military blockade of Taiwan by China? The thing about the blockade is, again, China can just use missiles based on the mainland. They can destroy every port in Taiwan, flatten everything with just these missiles. They don't actually need to send their ships to physically surround it. And they also have submarines, by the way, which Harpoon missiles are useless against. So they could effectively blockade Taiwan doing that without even putting their ships in jeopardy. This is why a lot of US war games are focused on China for some reason needing to physically invade the island of Taiwan, because every other scenario would just be like, nope, they just have tons. They have the largest missile arsenal on Earth, and one of the most capable missile arsenals on Earth, and everything that they need to get done can be done more or less with these missiles. And even if the US wanted to try to create some kind of makeshift port and deliver something to Taiwan, China could just blow that up with missiles also. I mean, it really is their advantage, and it's the tyranny of distance. The US has to cross an entire ocean to pick this fight with China. Carl?
Exactly. And also China now do have air superiority over Taiwan. I mean, the moment the war starts, all the air base in Taiwan will be destroyed by missiles, and the Chinese Air Force will dominate the sky. What's a harpoon missile gonna do? They're ship killers. They're not freaking shooting airplanes. So I mean, and also like Brian says, they're not going to be delivered until 2029. So if China put a naval blockade before then, sorry, there's how your missiles going to make to Taiwan. You know, it's not like Ukraine where it shares a border with Poland, right, a NATO country. Here you're going to have to physically deliver those missiles to the island of Taiwan. And if China put a blockade, sorry, no deliveries.
It's interesting how they're obsessed about this invasion of Taiwan. It seems like they've seen too many movies of Normandy, D-Day, everything is going to happen in one day. And no, I mean, probably there's going to be some stages, and it would be very costly for China in human lives. Why do that? I think they're much smarter. I want to point out one thing is how the US is completely spread out around the world. 800 bases. And again, you said it many times, Brian. It's the army, the military spending is profit driven. It's not purpose driven. So spread out all around the world. Now you take China and Russia. Both countries, they've been focusing not on power projection, but the opposite, on defense, counter power projection, and they've been focusing on only one war all along. The USSR, they were focusing. There was a main focus on a danger with NATO bloc, and maybe more marginal with the Japan unfinished war. Related to the Kuril Islands. China, it was since 1949 only one focus, Taiwan. And marginal, like maybe with India and so on. The US fighting countless wars, too much spread out, declining. China in the meantime, not only now they're preparing for war but they're not going to a war economy. It's just incremental increase. They say that China is actually expanding really fast, its military spending. No. It's incremental. It's in parallel with its economy. Economy is growing 5%. Well, the increase of 7%. But it's in parallel, economy is growing, but we're not going to a war economy. The day that China goes into a war economy with the industrial capacity that China has, with the EU and the US completely desindustrialized, you cannot compete. But again, I think the fate of China is also linked together with Russia. China needs absolutely Russia. It's existential. But I want to point out one thing also. There's this a lot of people are talking about. There's this alliance. It's a formal alliance between Russia and China. Yes, there is. China is going to help as much as it can. But China, you need to keep in mind that China wants to create a multipolar world where it's not going to be about taking sides and going, and making alliances. It goes against the fundamentals of what China wants to do. You're not going to replicate what was done before. So China would go to very great lengths not to get into a conflict helping Russia. I'm talking about physically. China would do, even selling weapons, it doesn't want that because it goes against the fundamentals of what China wants to create, the future multipolar world. And I like to make a parallel of, the meetings we've had with the BRICS. recently, and the Yalta meetings just during the war. War was not over, but they were preparing the world of tomorrow. Well, you know what? This is what we're living right now. War is not over. Actually, war hasn't started yet in China. But you know what? The war is being redrafted. The everything is changing already, and we see the impact in the Middle East. Now you have lots of countries emboldened. Just think about it. What Saddam Hussein did and Gaddafi did. You know what they did to Gaddafi for going against the dollar? He was sodomized. That's the reality. Sodomized and killed. That's what they did. Now you have 50 countries at the same time doing exactly the same thing. The world is changing. No matter if there's conflict or not, no matter what happened in Russia, China, you will not stop that. De-dollarization, that's the end of US hegemony. So it's either they wake up and realize, well, the world has changed. You cannot change this move, this trend. Just become an adult and let's sit down and find a solution.
And you're right, Angelo, what you said earlier, that China do not want US to collapse. I mean, despite that meme that says the CIA discovered the secret plot of China just sitting back and witness US collapse on itself, but China actually does not want to see US collapse because China wants to continue to do business with United States. China was perfectly fine to continue to buy agricultural products from United States. China want to have TikTok functioning in United States. I mean, China want to buy technological goods from United States, which US is banning right now. I mean, it's literally win-win, but US has decided to cut off its own nose to I don't know. Now it's more like cutting off all the limbs. Just for what? Because they're stupid. But it goes back to because our elite don't really care about us, right? They already got their money lined up from all these military defense industries. They don't really care. Why should they invest in education? Why should they invest in public infrastructure? The Chinese leaders, on the other hand, they want to see the pie grow larger for everybody, so that the tide lift all boats. So my hope, is I don't know if U.S. is going to come to senses, but maybe whatever the coming economic recession, whatever will kind of deflate that U.S. hubris a little bit. Deflate that ego a little bit, and then people realize, okay, let's come to our senses. Let's just do business. Let's just focus on better our lives than trying to be like the global cop and the global hegemon. That only benefits a very selected few people in freaking, all the think tanks and all the think tank backers, all those military defense industries. It doesn't have to be this. U.S. doesn't have to just be running military Keynesianism forever. And the only reason that we're able to do that is because, again, with a dollar hegemony. But the dollar hegemony is ending. So, people have to face reality sooner or later. It just matter of how much pain they're gonna take before that. I mean, it's sad but true. I'm hoping, because as much as I rant about United States, I rant as like a former lover, because before I really saw myself as really former believer of the American dream. I thought I was this poor immigrant boy that made it through the meritocratic system of the United States, went to a good college, get a good tech job, etc., etc. Before I realized the game is all rigged, but I still have hope that U.S. will someday, hopefully not too far in the distant future, live up to all the ideals it espoused. It's trying to tell everybody else to live up to. I hope like United States does it itself.
Well said. I just want to reiterate, because I say this every single time. China has a larger population, 4 times the population of the US, access to plenty of resources. They graduate millions more engineers every single year than the United States does. They're going to surpass the United States. It's inevitable, and it's irrational to think that it shouldn't be, that China can't or somehow shouldn't be allowed to. That is irrational. When you're an American, it's hard to believe that any other nation could be number one besides America. But having lived overseas and living in countries where people not only survive but thrive with the knowledge that they're not number one, and actually are doing much better than I think a lot of Americans are doing back home in the US. It's not important. It's not that important. And just like you say, Carl, it's these people in these think tanks, it's these elitists. They're the only ones benefiting from this. And even from their point of view, their limited point of view, they don't realize that actually what they're doing is not in the best interest of their own self-preservation long term. I don't think that it is. And I agree with both Angelo and Carl that I would like to see the US become rational. I would like to see the current interests, whatever, collapse, blow away. And I want more rational people to take their place. And I'd like to see a United States that can find a constructive role in and among the other nations of the world, rather than this irrational obsession with trying to conquer the entire planet. I want to thank Angelo, as always, for joining me on this Friday night. You as well, Carl. Thank you so much for spending time with us, sharing your insight and expertise. It's always a pleasure, and I'm sure everyone tuning in live learned a lot. I want to thank everyone who did tune in. Please like and share. Look in the video description below for all of Carl's links to his Patreon, to his Twitter, Angelo as well. Everywhere you can find and follow his work, and also other places you can find and follow the new Atlas. I'm going to show Carl's Twitter.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Before Brian signs off, I'd like to make an announcement. So tomorrow, Brian Berladek has agreed to be my guest on my show on Yiswen at TNT Radio Live. So it will be tomorrow Beijing time from 1 to 2 p.m. So that will be...
Almost forgot about that.
Yeah, Brian, you're going to be there. You're going to be there. Tomorrow, 1 to 2 p.m. Beijing time. So that's what, like 1 to 2 a.m. New York time. That's a little bit late for North America. But if you're on the West Coast, you can still tune in. Still like reach a decent evening hour. And that's my I gained my account back. Thank God. I lost my account for 7 days, and freaking hacker was pushing 10 laptop scans. So again, I just like to say I will never sell merchandise on my Twitter account, except maybe my wife's handmade jewelry or my Silk and Steel branded T-shirt. That's it. I'm not in the business of selling laptops. So thanks, Brian.
Yes. Carl Zha, ZHA, at Carl Zha on Twitter. Same here. There's a lot of these scams going on. If anyone contacts you as the new Atlas talking about Bitcoin, just know that I would never talk about Bitcoin in any sense, let alone try to sell you Bitcoins or financial advice. So just block those people and report them. It definitely isn't me or Angelo trying to contact you. So again, thank you, everybody. And until next time, bye for now.